Hello, friends, and welcome to the Exploring Washington State podcast. My name is Scott Cowan, and I'm the host of the show. Each episode, I have a conversation with an interesting guest who is living in or from Washington State. These are casual conversations with real and interesting people. I think you're going to like the show. So let's jump right in with today's guest. Well, welcome back. This is part 2 of my interview with Lou. Lou, in this chapter, we're going to be talking about your career with your agency, and we're going to be talking about this other project, which I'm going to let you disclose, that we're sitting in. So let's go.
Awesome. So I think one of the things that I didn't really honestly know about going into working in design was that pretty much everybody moonlights. They may take a small job here and there for a little extra scratch, or they do different parts maybe of their job that they don't get to do at their job. When I was going back in the time machine, I was coming out of a photo shoot that we were doing. It was like entrepreneurs in Seattle, and I was helping someone take some stuff out to their car, and I remember she popped the back of the trunk and there was a bunch of hockey jerseys in the back, and I was like, what's this? What's this for? And she's like, oh yeah, I coordinate this thing called the Ronald McDonald House Microsoft Hockey Challenge, and it was a celebrity hockey game every year to raise money for Ronald McDonald House. And I was like, wow, this is great. And I remember that year, it's usually in February. So I remember I went, and that year that I went, Wayne Gretzky was a celebrity coach. Still hockey is not big at this moment. We have no NHL team. We have the Thunderbirds. So I'm sitting two rows up from the bench, and there's Wayne Gretzky coaching, and this is before I'm playing, right? So little Wayne Gretzky on TV, Wayne Gretzky 3 feet away, coaching at the celebrity game. So I reached out to this contact that the woman had given me that we had photographed for Seattle Magazine. And before you know it, I'm doing pro bono design work for Ronald McDonald House. And it was cool because I was born in Seattle. And when I was born, I spent quite a bit of time at Children's.
Oh, okay.
And I was at Children's before there was Ronald McDonald House. And for people who don't know what Ronald McDonald House is, essentially if you are a parent with a kid who has serious illness, long-term illness, or is needing care at Children's or Fred Hutch, and live within a certain area or outside of a certain area of Seattle, you can come and stay at Ronald McDonald House for a low fee while your children are getting care. Mm-hmm. They provide room. There's resources. There's a temporary office for parents so they can be close to their kid while they're getting care. And often that care is a long time. Kids who have cancer, or so on and so forth. So it was kind of like this universe connection of finding a way for me to get back to with the skills that design skills and marketing skills to help Ronald McDonald House raise money. Most of what I did was create storytelling and work. I got to bring in my collaborators on my network, and through that work, I got work. If you do good work out of the spirit of giving back, then the universe sort of reciprocates over time. I met a lot of people. I was on the board of Ronald McDonald House. a lot of people know Ronald McDonald House. They drive through, get McDonald's, and there's a little bin they can put money in, but they don't really know exactly what it is. When you actually see what it is and you see the impact of what they're doing, it's pretty powerful. And McDonald's as a company doesn't actually, I mean, they support it, but the real support is people making donations. So I went on to do work with Ronald McDonald House for 16 plus years, and Ronald McDonald House kind of became kind of the anchor of, I guess, the way I saw running my own work with my own clients, which was, you want to work with someone who's giving back as like a core principle. And it was something I learned in high school. And it was something I definitely learned, at Gonzaga. It's part of the Jesuit education, and I think sometimes people can't quite figure, like my job, I'm not sure what I can do but there's always something that some organization needs. And I always tell students now, like when I go back and do like workshops or teach, like if you can find an organization that you care about or believe in their purpose, there's a way to give back, what you've been able to give. And, for me, though, it was perfect. It was Ronald McDonald House. So the reason it became a big part of Maxon House and my studio is that I think a lot of the work that I got as a result of Ronald McDonald House was a lot of the kind of work that I wasn't necessarily doing at the other places I worked at. And as this side benefit is because I did work for Ronald McDonald House in support of this specific event and others, is I've played in like 15 or 16 Ronald McDonald House celebrity hockey games. So I've gotten to play with even more players that I had, Kiefer Sutherland, Pat LaFontaine from the Islanders that I used to watch, growing up as a kid. And so it's that thing where your personal passion and your work kind of meet for a greater purpose. So it's been great. And when I send out my portfolio, when I'm working with client or when I'm getting introduced or introducing myself to new clients in my portfolio, the second to last page in my portfolio is a story that the Ronald McDonald House wrote about the work that I've done with them. And I guess for me, it's sort of like a Harry Potter sorting hat. If they don't want to work with me, then I don't really want to work with it, because I want to work with brands that have that same spirit of giving back. And when we moved out of Seattle and out to Carnation, it was a little bit of a further drive to get to Ronald McDonald House. So I was looking for kind of a new or an additional outlet to always have that giving part. So I in Carnation, the town is named after the Carnation brand, the milk brand, the dairy brand. And there's a huge research facility that was here originally before Carnation brand got acquired by Nestle. But there was a organization there that was a Camp Corey for kids who were sick or had issues similar to kids that were at Ronald McDonald House, where they could come and have a summer camp experience. There were medical facilities at the campus of Carnation Farms, and slightly after we moved here, and we're underway with our project that we're going to talk about, I got to meet folks at Camp Corey and was going to do work with them, which was a great natural extension from Ronald McDonald House, like telling stories, supporting families and kids, to give them a great experience. Well, they ended up moving up to like Mount Vernon because Carnation Farms is super hilly and a lot of kids are in wheelchairs. It's not like that's the last thing you want to have.
Not conducive.
Yeah. But it led to kind of a community connection. And I ended up, at the time, there's weird sort of like connections of sort of like you make a decision, and the decision that you make then connects you to something else, like we've been talking about. So the city of Carnation was kind of going through a transition, and they put together a committee to help of experts in the business community to help kind of re-examine what it was about Carnation that was great and attracting more people, thus attracting more visitors, dollars, tax dollars. So someone I had met in town was like, hey, you should do it. And we just moved here. We were renting a house. And so I volunteered. And, suddenly it's like again, like probably not the smartest strategic way to start your company. Like, so I'm going from pro bono to another free volunteer thing. But if I think about it, it's perfect, right? Because when I started this whole journey, like I didn't make money doing my zine, now and then we got a check from Tower Records for like $10 or $15 or something, but it was always jump in and do the work and then figure it out,
Mm-hmm.
So I met a lot of people in Carnation being on this board and help write their positioning statement, to create Carnation as a destination brand. And through the people that were on the board, or on this committee, I got connected in town and just got to meet a lot of people who ran the Toll Historical Society, and learned a lot about the town that I didn't even know. Like I knew about Carnation. It wasn't a place, it was a place that you kind of pass through,
Mm-hmm.
but it wasn't a place that you would necessarily stop at. And, it helped me. I eventually, when the Camp Corey left, it reintroduced me to the actual family behind Carnation Farms and the Carnation brand. Like I met the family, and that became like one of my first real clients of the agency. So they were looking for a way to create kind of a sustainable, like programming, education about food, where your food comes from, farming, so on and so forth, as a new foundation. The family kind of came back. Camp Corey moved out. They were doing upgrades to the campus. They needed a flagship kind of experience for people to come to. And so we actually took one of the old housing bays for the workers that worked at the farm way back and created a farm stand, like a working farm stand that was sort of like, it's almost like a living museum, but like a look back into what Carnation the brand was, but also a look forward into like what the farm's purpose was and how you could actually activate that. So I met a few people through town, and suddenly I worked with the family and the folks there for a few years and got that up and running. Started kids camps. My kids worked there during the summer. I got access to archives, and through archives, I got to kind of, through the archives and sort of the story of the farm, I learned a lot more about the story of Carnation, about the name of Tolt and then Carnation and back to Tolt. I learned about how the railroad came to Carnation because there were connections with the family and being informed that a railroad was coming, and they were trying to figure out where to site the farm so that it could take advantage of the railroad. We had great resources here in terms of timber, and obviously the dairy, and the town itself that we didn't even know about. But we found property here, we bought the property, and our plan was to build a house. We knew about Carnation, the name, but we had no real deep dive. So I think experiences get richer when you know the history, and then you meet the people behind it. And so soon, like the sort of story of Carnation sort of like come to life for me, and through these connections and everything. And then I was doing, I had enough contacts, and one of the client that I worked with that sold to Regents Blue Shield was starting a new thing, and that became another anchor client. And we started a new kind of health and wellness brand, and that eventually was sold to Ariana Huffington's company, Thrive Global, which was a multi-year engagement, and then just started more like hand picking the kind of stuff. I knew I wanted to work at least to do like a magazine or some kind of media thing was always going to be in my orbit. So the way I envisioned my day or my career was that 60 to 75% was going to be ongoing work with clients. So like ongoing retainer work or relationship work, 25, 30%, whatever, do the math, was going to be open to like new things. So some things eventually cycle out and some things come in. And then I was going to have sort of like, that was the pie of work, but then there was like this separate, smaller dessert, which was going to be this pro bono component, and to carry on from Ronald McDonald House. And so over time, I just kind of built it. I have a magazine that I've been doing for a long time. I still get to work, like I'm still going on photo shoots with Thor.
Okay. So Thor's in this chapter of your life too.
Yeah,
Okay.
Thor makes it to chapter 2.
Okay.
And others, I get to work with a lot of illustrators that I worked with over the years. I'm doing a lot more film. It's a funny story, but so when I was at Brooks, we had just switched photographers for the catalogs, and I had hired this new photographer, and his rep hired this, was going to hire a production company to kind of do this thing. So we were going down to Palm Springs for the shoot. So I'm sitting in my office at Brooks. This is before starting my own thing. And this guy walks in and to my office. And my office at Brooks, I mean, it's probably the size of where we are right now, but just one story, not two stories. And it's just littered with stuff everywhere on the walls, like downstairs. Just running stuff, running inspiration for brand. I had a big blueprint of like the design for the house up there, because that's where we were, in that phase. And there was just like, it was like wall to wall inspiration. The only thing that wasn't covered was the door, because it was like, probably someone needed to see that someone was in there. Anyway, so this guy comes in, and his name is Craig Brooks. And so the rep had hired Craig. He was working at another company, and basically the way I understand it, maybe, is that he basically started the company on this job. So he started a company called Content Partners with a K for this job. So he left where he was at, and he started his own company. So this was like, a long time ago. And then we're down in Palm Springs, and a lot of these shoots, like you're running some you're permitting locations, some you're not. Some super organized in Lexus, some super not organized like a zine. So we're like on the corner, we want to get this shot, and we're kind of like in front of this person's house, so we're like getting ready for the shot, and this lady runs out. And she's like, "What are you doing?" And she's like, "Are you, this is like my house. I don't know if you can shoot here." And like without a pause, I'm standing there with Craig. Craig walks out. He's like, "Hey, like, I'm Craig Brooks of Brooks Sports." and then like she brings out like lemonade or cookies, right? Oh. And so fast forward back to where we were, but I met Craig at Brooks, and then we've been working together like ever since. Like we've traveled around the world. We've been in We have shot stuff for BMW. He started his company with this project that I didn't even know him. And then over time, like he's pretty much worked with me on every major thing that we've worked on together. We have a like mutual love of design, mutual love of architecture, mutual love of cars. And we were, I was working with Zulily in Seattle, and they needed a TV commercial by Thanksgiving. So this is 2019. And it was like June I think it was like June of 2019. And I had this big trip planned with my wife. We were going to take the train take the Empire Builder, which was the original Great Northern, from Seattle to Chicago, spend a few days in Chicago. And then I think we flew back. And so started, they're like, we need this TV commercial by Thanksgiving promoting all these things for Zulily. I was like, okay, great. I'm going on this trip that I have planned. So we get on the train, we go to Chicago, and we're in the Chicago Art Institute. We go down to the basement. In the basement, they have this thing called, it's like a Thorn Miniatures. It's like this lady from Chicago who had a lot of money, and she commissioned all these little rooms that were miniatures. Okay. And so we walk in, and right as you enter, there's this plaque, and it's Wes Anderson. And, you know, like Craig wasn't with me on the trip, but, you know, Craig and I, like, huge fans of Wes Anderson, watched all the movies, everything. So, like, here's this little bit from Wes about his love of miniatures, you know. And so I check out all these things, and that was like it. Like, I got this idea at that moment. I was like, hey, we should do this campaign, because Zulily is like all these products from all these brands, and you have to get permission to use the brands if you use the actual product in the commercial, right? And we didn't have a lot of time. Like, it takes a lot of time to go through legal and everything. So I was like, what if we built this world, this miniature world with products that represented categories, like a fire truck, but it wasn't like a Tonka fire truck. It was just
a fire truck.
The concept of a fire, you know. And what if we, and the experience itself for like the user it's all on your phone or your computer. There's no like Zulily store to go to. Like, you can't drive down and, you know. So I said, what if we build this whole world? And, you know, I saw this thing with Wes Anderson and these miniatures, like my head's like on fire. And so I get back and I go in and meet with the CEO, then the CEO. And I remember going in there, and I had some like reference images from Wes Anderson movies, and I'm feeling like I'm on fire. Like, this idea is like, nobody's going to kill this. And I remember him, like, after I got through like the first part, he was like, who's Wes Anderson? I was like, oh gosh. This is going to go one of two ways. And it didn't look like the right way. But again, it was kind of, it was like, okay, well, I kind of had to like reframe it for him. He's like, well, look, here's the deal. Like, we have X amount of money and we have this amount of time. So as long as you get this thing done as long as this thing is on by Thanksgiving, you know, I'm just, you know, run with it. So, here's like this like worlds colliding thing again. So I call up the producer from Content Partners, who works with Craig. And I'm like, Zulily's down at the water, down by the sculpture park. So I get in my car, drive up to Capitol Hill to Content Partners. And I kind of like, I pitched them the same presentation I gave the CEO. I'm like, what do you guys think? Like, they're like, oh, of course they're excited because it's, you know, like Wes Anderson, and just as reference, you know. And I'm thinking, okay, like these reference images of these movies, you know, and I mean, Wes Anderson builds imaginary worlds right? Whether they're miniature stop motion or they're live action, but every last detail is considered, and everybody knows sort of their role, like a sports team, but for movies. And there's a culture of being on the set in a Wes Anderson film, like there's a culture of being in the locker room, sport. So it's like everything's so there. I'm like, do you think we could do this? Like, do you think we could pull this together? And I'm thinking, oh, we're going to shoot it in Seattle. Well, maybe we'll go to Portland because there's Leica studios that did like Coraline. And so they were researching it, and they came back and they said, well, we looked at your reference polls, like a mood board of kind of how you want it to look. And you try to make it really real for the client. Like, I'm pulling things that are kind of in the same color palette as the Zulily brand and showing them some, like, you're doing kind of like, you realize, oh, like I'm getting paid to watch Wes Anderson movies now and pull reference enough to create a connection to get someone else to take a leap to do this thing. So I remember they called me back, and they're like, well, actually, like, we have this producer, and she worked on the stop motion film, and through some contacts and yada, 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 why don't we just work with a guy who's did a stop motion for Wes Anderson on Fantastic Mr. Fox, which is a Roald Dahl adaptation, and Isle of Dogs. I was like, okay, so now we're going from like, I've been on the train, I see the miniatures in Chicago, I see the Wes Anderson thing. I'm like sitting in the living room of my house on my couch at like 2:00 in the morning, building this like world in my head, and then going to pitch it to now. Craig and I are on, a British Airways headed to London to go work with a huge part of the crew that worked on these movies from the reference in fact, one of the polls, the images pulled was a behind the scenes still of the guy. I don't know if have you seen Isle of Dogs? It's the stop motion.
I have.
So basically there's a scene where they're preparing sushi, and then there's a poisonous like wasabi bean that gets put in to poison this person. Anyway. And so it's all like stop motion. So the guy that's holding the thing, like that's the guy that we're working with.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. So Craig and I like have gone from like Palm Springs to like London, and you're just sort of like, it's like the Wayne Gretzky thing. Like you manifest this vision, and then suddenly like, you're in the room, you're on the shoot with the Wu-Tang Clan, and you've never like been on a shoot, and you just kind of have to, you're in there like talking shop with Lou Piniella, and it was just like one of those magical moments. We were there in London for like 2 weeks, and then flew back, and then went back to watch it finish, and I remember standing up in front of the entire company at Zulily debuting this thing. And I don't think, like this was like, every house on the block looks the same. And then there's like this house that looks whack. Like that's what it felt like. I was speaking a different language. And, I remember after showing the work, people that I had never spoken to me at that company came up to me. It's like, this is like the first time, because it's so tactical. It's miniatures. It's very cinematic, but it's also very tactile, and it's imperfect. Like it's not perfect. Like we talked about, like a photo is here, like, what a tree looks like, but creating this world, extracting the values of the brand, and then communicating it through something that's first inspiring and entertaining, then inspiring, and then makes you want to, and, it's been like a one after the other. I mean, we did that, and then like you want to do it again. It's like the Gretzky thing. Like, yeah, I want to go do it again, but I'm going to play better. So it's just it's a series of things, and I think now, and I think we're going to hit the train, right?
We're going to hit the train.
Okay.
Well, yeah. Well, better than the train hitting us.
Or you can cut that and I can.
no, let's just, but what I do want to ask about one of your other clients that I watched a video of because I was intrigued. I don't know if they're still a client, but you were doing work with BMW.
Yeah.
Are they still an active client at this time?
I'm going to be potentially working with a different part, like more at the local level.
Okay.
But we can
So
chat.
I watched this video commercial that you did. I don't know. I saw it on YouTube and that's my Mickey Mouse watch. And you guys are driving an electric BMW, or I don't know if it was you.
Oh yeah.
Driving the electric. So this is totally nothing to do with the work, but you were hauling, or the car was hauling some cardboard lanterns.
Oh yeah.
Are those? So where was that filmed at?
So it's funny because that was a content partners collaboration. So what was interesting is we had this idea at Lexus years before about like the group that I worked with. There's kind of two groups. There's the advertising group that does sort of like the sexy car reveals with the helicopters shooting the cars, and we were like, again, I think we were like, that's like Major League Baseball, and then we were like AA baseball. Like we're doing kind of like we're hanging outside of a minivan with a camera. We're sort of MacGyvering things, and at the end of the day, most people who see this stuff have no clue what it takes to either get it done or how it gets done. So the assessment of whether it's good or not is subjective. It's really like, did it connect with them? Did it make them feel anything? Do they care about it? And so having done a lot of that, stuff, sort of in a lo-fi type of way, we had this idea of taking, and I think some of this came from Brooks and from Dave Larson, who was my boss there, because he would like preach about taking kind of a detail from something and combining it with like a feature from something completely different to make the point. And so for the BMW thing, the idea was, let's tell a story of this little electric car that's made from sustainable materials, recycled materials, so on and so forth. We were shooting it here because that's where we could get a car, through the dealer, right? And the car at that point, I think it was the orange BMW i3, and it was a production car, so it wasn't quite out yet, and it didn't really work. Like it could only like it was a prototype, so it wasn't like you couldn't go buy it yet. So the range was very limited. Right. And so you had to kind of plan your shoot around that. But I think it was content partners had a relationship or knew someone at Gray Pants, and they make like furniture and lighting out of scrap cardboard, recycled cardboard. So the idea was, let's, instead of being like, here's under the hood of the i3 and here's the recycled, hemp material that makes up the shell and blah, blah, blah. Like, let's tell the features of the car through a story about this local group, Gray Pants. So the storyline was like, we start at Gray Pants and we get to this story of craft and passion about design and materials and sustainability. We're at their shop, which is in kind of near like past Starbucks headquarters. Cool, like super cool spot. And they have these scrap lights that are made from recycled cardboard. And they sort of make this thing. And then they get in the i3 and they drive really like through Seattle to a ferry. And then they get on the ferry, and then there was some drone stuff to kind of get those overhead shots. And where they end up is actually at it's like a garage, but it's kind of like a space designed by them, I think.
Okay.
And they're kind of installing the piece, and then night comes and then it illuminates this. So it kind of goes end to end, and it became like this kind of anthem spot, which was not the regular like flashy car spot. And I think we've been, Craig and I and content have been telling stories like that for a long time. It was weird. It's like sort of like when I bridged from like magazines and media to brand and advertising, it was when like storytelling became popular. Well, storytelling is something I feel like I've been doing. It's something like you're doing from the time you're a kid. Like mom asks you, "Did you take the cookie?" You invent, invent the story, right? And stories obviously go back to the beginning of time, right? Like we did this spot for this company that does like smart screens for schools, tech screens, and the spot is like an animated spot, and it starts with this guy at the cave wall, and he's got a group around him, and he's like explaining something at the wall, and the spot transforms from the cave to like the stars, to like the classroom, to like the lab, to like the workplace, and I think it's the hardest thing for brands to do is to get out of the way, like to be confident enough in the thing they're selling, or the service they're selling, to remember that like they're also in the job of like you can't bore people to death. You have to give them something different than they can get from somewhere else, and then it's a value, and it's worth tuning into. And I think and like when we were downstairs and I was showing you some of the work from the original Maxon advertising back in the day. I mean, like that's what they were doing that like in the 40s. And so it's kind of
I'm going to interrupt you.
Oh yeah.
Maxon advertising in the 40s was your
great grandfather.
Okay.
Yeah. Great. Which I over time have learned a lot more about, just through family and eBay.
So maybe through eBay, family archives supplemented by eBay. But the thing is that maybe this whole industry you were genetically predisposed to it. I mean, interestingly. Okay.
Yeah.
So I just hijacked your thread. I apologize.
No.
But I want to talk about what we're sitting in. Or do you want to talk about the other structure first?
I'll go to the other structure because I think it'll feed in. So, which is a good like reverse tie-in to the legacy a little bit. I think sometimes maybe there's pressure if you grow up in a family business, maybe where there's pressure to like join the business, right? But I think for me, I didn't really know about any of that, to be honest, like until I was probably like 10 or 11 or 12 or 13. My dad worked in kind of the pre-production side of the business, meaning, the creative's already been done and they're getting ready to run the ad in the magazine, right? Or, and they have to create color separation, and they're preparing the media to be published. And so, like I grew up going on press checks, like when I was at my dad's, and it was like before we went home, like he's going to an appointment and he's sitting with a client and they're looking at like their ad and making sure the color looks good and everything is lined up and there's no, like if something needs to be touched out or, so I had no clue what any of that meant, to be honest with you. But, I got to go around and see and visit a lot of the agencies that I ended up actually working at. And then, I remember one day, this was back in the day, like the monitors were gigantic. They're huge. And there were guys in the basement that all they did was sit in these like they had like a hood over the monitor because you couldn't have any outside light and you're retouching, a fashion catalog or this or that. And I remember like being so fascinated, right? It was like seeing that architecture for the first time. It was like, wow, like this is like Dad, like this is cool. And I remember him telling me, he's like, you don't want to be down here. Like what? And these guys that were everyone that was down there doing this work, like that's a craft. That's a separate craft. Like it's not just a digital craft, but it's like an eye for color and making sure things look, perfect. But he's like, what you want to be doing is you want to be the person that comes up with the idea that they're working on, that they're, tweaking and preparing. And, I learned from seeing all the ads and the work from the family agency, that like, that's what I was excited about. My uncle would bring me copies of Communication Arts, which was like this huge, it was like a book of a magazine with all the best. Every year they had one issue that had all the best advertising. They had all the best design and they had all the best illustration. And I remember like pouring through these things like a kid would pour through Mad Magazine. Right. And then trying to like draw the ads, like recreate the ads. And I remember at Gonzaga going to like the Hastings or Tower and teaching myself how to basically recreate what I was seeing in like Wired magazine as a way to teach myself. So it was like this progression to this point. And where it transitions to the other thing we want to talk about is that, my great grandfather there was a place in upstate Michigan called in Onaway, Michigan, and they had like a 200-acre piece of land, and they had a compound for agency executives and clients to come up from Detroit, like on the weekend, relax, be in nature, really beautiful setting near Black Lake. I've never actually been there, but it's on my list to go. And it's actually on Maxon Road.
Okay. Okay.
So there may be a sign disappearing in the near future, but you didn't hear from me. But I think
we'll edit that part. No, just kidding.
When I saw pictures of this place, and I have these books of it that I've gotten over the years, I realized like, wow, like, we're in the like noise and mess every day, whether you're like watching TV or you're listening to things or seeing things. And the business is so much about, and especially now with AI, right? Because people are putting in prompts and everybody's getting the same result, right? And the business that we're in, really, it's why fit in when you can stand out, really. Business. It's not, if everybody looks the same photographically or illustratively or logo, like how do we know what to buy? How do we know what to do? How do we know what to choose? And I think being away from that center, like when we moved and we bought land out in Carnation, we've never lived in like the country before, but I could see looking and doing research about this compound, it was almost like a resort, that you need to go out and do other things in order to bring something back to the work. And, so when we were we lived in Seattle. We lived in Ballard, and we lived in Queen Anne, and lived in Madrona, and kind of experienced Seattle. We moved out to Snoqualmie, and house on the corner, white picket fence, development, really a perfect spot at an early time to raise kids. You have built-in neighbors and so, but then kids get older, activities spread out. you're not the benefits of it aren't exactly the same as when. So we found land in Carnation, and it's a little over 21 acres, and that dream sort of realizing this space of privacy, but also connection to nature, and a place where family and friends can come and to experience kind of a different way of living in a house. We decided that we were going to commission this house like this. And it wasn't necessarily inspired by the Maxon cabin, which is what we call it. But I think there were parts of it that were like, wow, what if we had this space where, literally the vision was that I could work, like my commute would be here, like in nature. Right. Mm-hmm. And I'm still traveling. I'm still, going to meetings and traveling to New York or Los Angeles or London, but lessening the time, and this is before COVID, lessening the time of driving to somewhere to work to like already being there. So, Christmas 2007, I get this book. It's called Tom Kundig Houses. It's the first book in a series of books, a series in which our house ends up being in one of them. And we worked closely, and we commissioned Olsen Kundig to design our house.
And what did you call the book earlier?
Oh, it's Tom Kundig Houses.
Wasn't it the most expensive book ever?
Yeah. So we call that book the most expensive book we've ever. It's like getting the college sweatshirt. It's like the sweatshirt was expensive, the education was free.
Right.
But no, it was like, and I think it was, I got the book, my wife and I were looking through it. We kind of had different ideas about what we wanted, about what we thought we wanted. We'd never lived in a house that was like a house that was where you're not just living on the inside, but you're living connected to the outside. Most houses like limited windows, and when you're in the house, you're in the house. Mm-hmm. You're not. So we got the book, and I remember even before looking at the pictures, because it's honest, like aside from the fact that we ended up hiring them to design our house, like the book was like one of the best architecture books that I had seen, because it wasn't just pictures, it was sketches and process and stories. It was sort of like dissecting a project. And I think it's like before you get into the foreword, the quote at the beginning is, only common things happen when common sense prevails. Okay. And I think it's unknown who the attribution is, but I remember looking at that and going, I think this is it, because it's sort of like the going left, going right, and doing a project like this. It's not like you're picking something out of a catalog and saying, make me this. It's like, here's some things, some values, or some moments or experience. It's like building or creating a house that's based on experience, not stylistically. Like, these are the things I want to do here. These are the experiences I want to have with my family. And as part of that, I had worked in my previous house. We had an office inside the house, and I knew with this project, because we were going to go right instead of going left. We had gone left before. We had lived in
suburbia, if you will.
In suburbia, yeah. And so my brief in to Tom and and the team was, I want to have my office detached from my house.
Okay.
and there's a great story in the book, there's a great story I think he tells about the project that's on the front of the book is called Chicken Point, and it's in Idaho, and it's on the lake. It's I think it's on the lake. I don't know if it's Hayden Lake. I don't remember. I think it is, but I remember him saying, like, the client said literally, like, wouldn't it be great if we could open up the wall, like the window to the view? And like, those are the questions, right? You know what I mean? It didn't even come from him. It came from the client. So it's like, wouldn't it be great if my office wasn't in the house? Wouldn't it be great if it was just detached from the house, like an outbuilding, you know? And he took that nugget from another client, and they created this kinetic moving glass wall. And it completely not only transformed that space, and we got to go visit that project, but it also was transformative, you know, for the work and for architecture, because even though a very forward-looking profession, a lot of people wait till someone else makes the big move before it's okay. It's like, okay, the water's cool enough, you can now step in without getting, you know what I mean? And I think it's the same thing here. So seeking out someone who chose that quote about only common things happen when common sense prevails, seeing that work, the show and the tell, and I guess the proof, it was sort of like, okay, like, this is someone who you A, want to go on an adventure with, and B, is comfortable with risk. And so you have a risk-taking client, me, or my wife and I, although she more hesitant than me, whatever, you know, and then Tom. So from 2009 to 2014, we worked out all the stuff. It's a big lot. There was a lot of forestry. There's a lot of story built into the site that we wanted to preserve. And then once we got the kind of plan for the house, a separate meeting was called, and I came in and met with Tom. I remember it was like October. It was raining like furiously, and I'm sitting in his office like waiting. And then I come in, and he pitched me on this idea of, like, what if your studio, that, you know, could not only be removed from the house, but could remove from the house, meaning that we could actually envision a scenario in which you come out of the house, out of the master bedroom, onto your patio, aka a platform, and the studio is waiting for you there, and it's nested in with the house, and you walk in, and then through kinetic sorcery, you physically interact with the studio, TBD how that happens, and you're able to move out into the woods, and you can kind of escape. It's not escaping. It's you're detaching from sort of like the reality, and you're going into this place to make and be open. And I was like, what? Like, okay, it's, you know, the first thing you're thinking, it's weird when you're the client after having clients, because then all the things that you probably call clients crazy on, like you're the one calling. And so then I had to remember the quote in the book, and I'm like, okay. So we start like talking about it. And he said, well, we have this client that we've kind of figured out a lot of this for. Like we had a similar idea, but it didn't really, that one didn't really happen, but it's actually possible. Like, so it's sort of like the window that moves, like they were at the Ballard Locks and they saw things being moved with hydraulics. And so they figured out that they could mechanically move something, you know? And so then I'm like, oh my gosh, the first thing I'm thinking is like, how am I I'm so excited. I was like peeing my pants. Like, how am I going to explain this to Cam when I get home?
I'm glad you said that, because that was going to be my question. How did you pitch this? I see the outcome, but how did you pitch?
Well, so after we, so at that point, the idea is basically that the studio at this moment, leaving the office in excitement, is a 1-story studio. So the height is basically the same as the house, which is 1 story, kind of long rectangular bar, and then a little kind of square or smaller rectangle that nests in. And, I'm thinking, oh my, it's like, to build something interesting is one thing, cool and expensive. To build that same thing and then to make it move, more expensive
By a factor of
by who knows, because nobody's really done it. And then like, you have to build a railway, and then you have to all this stuff, right? So went home, kind of like, I think I probably did more of like a slow drip of us, hey, how was it? How did it go? Well, there's this idea and this thing, and it might move. And the key was, the focus had to be on the house. Like, because at that point, like, the house isn't done, right? So the priority is get the house done, get the carport done, and then there's this idea in my head, okay, the little thing eventually pays for the big thing. Like, not literally pays for it, but the work that happens in there, like the house itself is for living and sleeping and hanging out, whatever. And I did work in the house for a long time while we were waiting to do this, but eventually, like, the work that happens in this small space pays for this bigger thing, right? So that was like that was like the pitch long term. There's a lot of questions. Why does it need to move? Why can't, like, I understand it, the size and everything, but why can't it just be kind of like, could it be more ceremonial?
But couldn't you have put like those old fashioned, because you haven't disclosed this yet, so I'm tipping it, but you could have gotten one of those old railroad cars where you pumped.
Oh yeah.
And you could have moved yourself to it.
Yeah.
Instead of moving. Anyway.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's a million ways to make it easier, than. Yeah, and I think you mentioned, I think on my LinkedIn, I've got this quote from Walt Disney, and it's something to the effect of like, I like the impossible because it's less competitive or something. Something like that. And I think the quote about the common sense prevails, and that quote, meet me perfectly, because it's sort of like being at that moment with the brand, with the client, or working on the brand at a moment where you can come in and make the most impact, versus kind of coming in and just sort of maintaining like very small steps. And so this was a big move. And I think, ultimately, like, this was a space that I was going to be creating in. And so the story of the space I was going to be working in, whether it moved or whether it didn't move, had to meet the mark I felt of the work that I was going to be doing in there. Right. And that is the calling card. So on we went, kind of like, it was drawn into the plans. We built a house, or the house was built. We didn't build the house. Very talented people built the house. And no sign of the railway or the car for now. Just sort of like out there. And then 2 or 3 years after we moved in, settled. I mean, it takes a long time to do something custom, and then you sort of like, then it was time, right? Because I was working in the kitchen, I was working in the living room. Everybody's home. I'm working. They're having fun. It's you're having to move into the bedroom. You're again, all pre-COVID. So so I was like, okay, like let's start to chip away. And the only way we made the house work is we kind of did it like the Johnny Cash song, one piece at a time. Like we'd make a small move every day towards it. We didn't write a big check and then suddenly it appeared. We always sort of had this agreement that we weren't going to completely disrupt our daily life to do all this. That we, you got to pay the bills, you got to, kids don't stop aging. Life doesn't stop going. And so, what I started doing though was two things. I started in my travels, I started looking seriously at trains and railroading. I mean, I had a model railroad growing up with my dad. It was pretty cool, like HO scale, maybe like a lot of little boys and girls have, around the tree or whatever. And, I don't know that like that stuck with me. So when the baton sort of like got passed or the idea came into my sphere, I was like, I guess I approached it like a project. Like with any project, whether it's something like even with Lexus, to be honest, like I didn't give can I swear?
Yeah.
I didn't give like two shits about cars. I didn't like get my driver's license till late. We lived in New York. I didn't need a car. I was not like a luxury car consumer
Okay.
before I worked on Lexus. And the first thing I did when I got that job is I went to the dealership and we got a car. Cause it's like, unless I'm driving,
so you probably shouldn't show up into that job in a Hyundai or a Ford Taurus.
Or same at Brooks. I remember I wore Converse one day and I got like this like passive aggressive note on sign saying like, oh no, someone left it on my boss's door saying, hey, you should tell your new person, like, because Converse was bought by Nike.
Right.
So whatever, a little PNW passive aggressive there. But, until you're in the product or in the thing, like how can you empathize with the customer pain points? So anyway, I got super into, it wasn't like a hard off the cliff drop into trains. It started with model trains. Like I went to the East Side Trains in Kirkland, like one of the oldest like model railroad shops, and I started learning about like the railroads that were here. Like that was like the entry drug into the land of trains. And then through my work with Carnation Farms, like I had access to all this archive footage. So I started looking through that and saw that there were trains in Carnation, which blew my mind because then in my mind, I'm thinking, man, I wish I was like, going to time, like 1913, what would it be like to see trains? And then I realized that the road I take every day is basically where the train came. Right. And, so I learned about the two trains, the Great Northern and the Milwaukee Road, both came through Carnation. So I was like, wow. When we were excavating for the house, we found rail spikes and we found like wire, like logging wires that they would have used to bring trees up and put them on like temporary logging. And so like our site itself could have been connected to like the history of railroads. So suddenly like this thing that the architects, imagining even has more substance. And then I'm like, full geek out foamer train mode. And then I had done an ad once for the Railway Museum in Snoqualmie when we lived there. And obviously been on the train a million times. And then I start researching about the Great Northern, and the Great Northern was one of the only transcontinental railroads that was not funded by the government. Right. And so I love that. Right. Like it was just this idea that someone had this like impossible dream to bring this railroad out. And the fact that railroad branched off and came and terminated in Carnation in this town that now I'm like living in. It's like all these things are colliding. So then I'm into this like garden scale model railroad, which is like crack cocaine of the train world. Like it started with like, I remember my wife and I went down there and we met this guy who was like their G scale guy, and he's like, okay, she's like, I'm gonna pick out a locomotive. So they didn't have a Great Northern one at that time. I got a Milwaukee Road. So I was like, one, I had it on my shelf. I'm like, well, this is going to need like some boxcars. Like 2 years later, I'm at like 50 G scale.
But you can stop anytime you want.
Yeah, I can stop. And then I'm like, oh, there's train shows. And then I would go and I'm meeting like, this probably sounds really bad, so you can take it out or not. But like, I'm probably one of the only people that's like not hooked up to an oxygen tank at the train show. So I'm getting to the booth like 50 times faster. And suddenly like there's cars that I hadn't even seen online. And G scale is already sort of like, it's not common. It's the biggest one. And there's the least amount of inventory. And then I started really getting into like, how are we going to build the track? They had engineered kind of a track system. But we started taking like more train trips. We went on the Empire Builder to Chicago on the trip I talked to you about for Zulily. We did it the other way. We took the Coast Starlight. I went with my son to Japan. We took the bullet train. Trains are a way of life in Japan. Like little kids, like schools, like go to the train stops just to see it's a celebrated thing in Japan. It's everywhere. And they're very punctual. And there were like moments of like the bullet trains have engineering in them where the train can just come to a stop during an earthquake. So there were like things I was learning about railroads and trains during this kind of incubation period before we got going that all made their way in to this thing. And I just got like, it took over, honestly. Like it was like this, suddenly it's like when you start researching a car you want to buy and then you start seeing the car everywhere.
Mm-hmm. Was that the reticular activation? Or something
yeah, I don't know.
There's a term for it.
So, 2019 fall, a friend of my wife's has a excavation and construction company. We're ready to like put money in, and build one piece at a time. We're going to build the track. So, we had to find rails. You can't just, it's not in the phone book. So I did a recon work, and I found a company down in Portland called Harmer Steel, and they take apart and they put in railroad track, like adult railroad parts and supply company. And in our original drawings, there was like spec for track, but I didn't really know how it worked. Like I never bought railroad track before, and like regular people don't buy railroad track, right? Companies do. So I sent away for the catalog. I got the catalog, and then we had structural engineering for the studio, and we had architectural plans for the studio. It was pretty. It was enough to get going, but it wasn't enough to finish. It was sort of like getting a puzzle, but like half of the picture's covered. Like you don't quite know what it's going to make. So that was good and bad, because there were parts of it I had gaps that I couldn't do. And the other thing was I learned a lot watching the house get built, and I knew this was going to be a kind of an unknown cost to build this. But the more I researched about it, the more I wanted to be more hands-on. And the crew that I worked with on parts of our house were going to be the crew that we worked with on this. So I decided to be
You were the general contractor?
The general contractor. Yeah.
Okay.
Which, like if you're building a shed in the backyard, is one thing, but to pick a project, your first project to GC with like zero experience and it moves,
what could go wrong?
Only common things happen when common sense prevails. So here we are. So we build the railroad track. It has to be perfect, laser leveled, completely flat. I had found some I did a lot of research. I found a lot of books. I would go down to, in Ballard, there's this thing called Balmer Yard, and it's the BNSF rail yard where they switch cars, and they have their little HQ there. And I started like meeting people who worked for the railroad, and I would ask questions. And so I kind of figured out what the lift was going to be in terms of how much ballast I needed, and just the composition of like a railroad. You know, it's crazy. Like in Japan, the railroad ties are like, everything is beautiful. Even the railroad ties. It's not just like creosote, like it's like beautiful.
Wow.
Like, you know, I knew that we probably weren't going to do it to that degree, because the other challenge that we had is that our railroad car, the railroad car studio was way bigger and way wider. So a regular railroad track is a little over 4.5 feet wide. Ours was going to be 15 feet wide. Right. So almost 3 times. And so we built the railroad track. We had rails shipped from Portland onto a flatbed semi truck. And then we had to hire a crane to lift the rails off to then move down our driveway, because you can't just have rails delivered to your house.
Amazon doesn't deliver these with Prime?
Apparently, and the drones, I don't know if they could
well, you have too many trees for the drone to work well here.
Yeah. And then kind of like either a very premeditated or complete coincidence was that when I got the way-bill for the materials for the rails, it said, you know, it shows the weight of the rails, like the weight, but right before that there's an abbreviation, and the abbreviation designates the railroad, and it said GN. I was like, oh. So I was like calling the guys. I was like, what is that? You know, and they're like, oh, it's the Great Northern. So now
these could have been just down. Well,
yeah,
you know where they come from.
I don't. Yeah. So we ended up getting rail that was part of the Great Northern Railroad, and it's called. There's you can buy new rail, or you can buy relay rail. And relay rail is rail that's already been run on, but is still at a rating or grade, as I understand it. I'm sure railroad people probably call in and yell at me, that you can still run on. So now the story elevates. Now we're actually going to be building a railroad using rails from the same railroad, not necessarily rail that was from Carnation, but rail that the Great Northern Railroad traveled on. So I'm like, now like my mind is blown, and my eBay crack habit starts, because now I'm trying to like find everything Great Northern, right? This is a very expensive journey. Anyway, so we get the rail. We have the rail here for probably 3 to 6 months, just laying in the grass. And, you know, I'd make these like little visits out to it just to see it. Like, you can't lift it. It's super heavy. And then we had to order splice bars to connect the rail pieces. And then we needed to figure out a way to get ties. So we worked with, I think it's called BMC, the building warehouse in Issaquah, and we got ties for to take us through 110 feet of rail, and they're Doug fir, which is what we have in our forest. Right. So, and then right before Thanksgiving, we had the crew out, and we ran all the levels. Basically, there's a kind of a leveled area that's like sand. And then underneath there's like 3 feet of ballast, and then there's ballast on top of the sand, and then you compose the railway, and the ballast helps drain, and then the sand levels and everything support, because as the train car moves over the tracks, it pushes down heavy on the rails, and the ties, called sleepers in the UK, provide the structural support. And like the house, which is a perfect rectangle, the rails have to be perfect. Right. So it's kind of funny, because you've got this like really weird thing that we're doing, but it has to live and exist on this completely geometrical 100% perfection. Anything off, and the thing that you're going to put on there is you're off the rails. Literally.
So how long did it take to set this? No, you've already disclosed this. So your track is 110 feet long.
Yeah.
So how long did it take to set that?
I mean, I think the build of the railway, just the railway, is about 3 months. So we had the leveling. Well, the grade out here was already level from when we did the house, but we had to just, you have to measure everything 50 times, make sure, because there's also a little give as things settle. We got all the ties out, all the like ground prep was a while. And then, we set all the ties first, and then we craned the rails on, because the rails are in segments. I think there's 8 segments, and not all the rails literally ran together on the railway when they were first
originally
run.
used, yeah.
So when they're sourced, like 2 of them are same X amount of feet, the next 2, but they weren't necessarily in the same spot. So ones have different, like some of them have a little curve or a little that has to be worked out. So we had to kind of first figure out which ones we're going to pair, and then once we got them locked, then we drove down to Portland and we got rail clips, and the clips basically sit on top of the tie, and then they bolt through. So the bolt holds the rail to the tie, and then the splice bars connect to the rail segment. So we had basically kind of once we had like a month and a half in, and it wasn't like there was work here every day for that long. It was just that when the crew could come to work on it. And so like right before Thanksgiving was when it was complete, when we basically craned the rails onto the ties. And even then we didn't have, the rails were lined up, but we didn't have the splice bars in or the clips in. We just had the structure of it. Once we had the structure of it, the next step was to take the architectural drawings, which are basically, there's the track system, and then there's the studio. So the origin of the studio is that essentially the caboose of the railroad, the last car, which really doesn't exist today, was the office of the railroad. Mm-hmm. That's where the conductor was. That's where the brakeman was. There was a desk. There was a sleeping area. There was a cupola in some, so they could see what was coming down the line if there was trouble on the tracks, maybe if they were about to get robbed. But it served a very important purpose on the railroad that now in today's railroads, they have I think it's basically a end of railroad device. It's a flashing light. One would argue with all the train derailments that maybe they should bring the caboose back.
Maybe.
Anyway,
maybe.
Another story for another day. So, so the office would not be, whereas the house is a long rectangular bar, the office would be sort of this tower, sort of taking inspiration of a working area downstairs and upstairs a cupola, and then also taking inspiration from other projects from the architect. There'd be a library upstairs. And so what we needed to do is we had to create basically a shop drawing from the architecture drawings for something for a fabricator. Mm-hmm. And I guess for the audience, I think the easiest way to explain that would be like you go to the Lego store and on the outside of the box, you see that it's a train. And then when you open up the instructions, you see all the parts. And then you see the instructions to build the parts. And that's the instructions is essentially the shop drawing. Mm-hmm. And then the bill of materials is all the individual Lego pieces. So that's kind of how it was approached. And one thing is we worked with an amazing fabrication group that we worked with before called Alpine Welding in Twisp, Washington. So the railroad was built in Washington. It was engineered in Washington. It was designed in Washington. I think the only thing that didn't come from Washington were the windows, California, and the rails, but may have been one time in Washington. But so our fabrication team at Alpine created worked with a guy, and they created a shop drawing, basically the instructions to build. And then once we gave them the budget go ahead, they started fabricating everything. It's a steel frame. It's about 24 feet tall. It's 10 by 15, 2 stories. We had to create, it's electric. It's an electric train. So, no exhaust, no environmental damage, very minimal.
So is this like M scale then?
This is, we call this whoa scale.
Whoa scale. Whoa scale.
Whoa scale.
Okay.
I don't know. Yeah, this is like, I don't, it was funny because I would talk to train people. Like there's my understanding is there's like foamers, there's people who like drool and love and follow and chase trains. And then there's actual train people who are pretty hardcore. Like it's a pretty hardcore culture of train folks. And I remember talking to this guy. I met a lot of really cool train people that helped me a lot, both in research of the Great Northern, Alan Miller, this guy David Sproul, people who worked for the Great Northern, people who worked for the Milwaukee Road, people who were in Carnation when the trains came through. And I don't remember which one it was. I don't think it was a local guy, but I was like, you know what? Like, what do you think? Like, is this, I mean, a train technically is something that pulls something else, but in terms of like a rail car, and I remember this guy saying, well, you know, it's not normal, but if it's got wheels and it's on rails, you got a railroad.
Right.
You know, and so, so I remember showing it, like showing initial plans and getting a vision for it. And then from there, we, like the team was like insane and amazing. Everything with the exception of probably the light switches and the lighting was custom made. So the wheels were fabricated on a custom lathe. Started as just blocks of steel, like circular steel that were custom made. All each floor is steel and was welded, custom welded. We had pretty amazing team of people who have experience doing like super high end welding for like yachts, and the plans from the architect were executed like 1-to-1. I mean, we did add functionality of a dumbwaiter so that we could transport small things from upstairs to downstairs, books, drinks, so on and so forth. That itself is almost like a mini a train within a train. It's kind of meta. It's a steel basket that moves by use of a conveyor belt, which is essentially like a sushi conveyor belt, off of a very small motor that's used in sushi restaurants in Japan. And so we sourced the motor, and that system was the mechanics for everything are electric. Because of the weight of the studio, it wasn't really feasible to move things like mechanically using like 7 simple machines, but the spirit is there. So every interaction with the studio is a physical interaction. One of the big things is in this sort of like architectural world of kinetic moving things, a lot of times things are moved with a wheel. And in talking to my railroad network, my board of experts, they told me, like, if you really want it to be railroad, like, you need to try to get a hold of this thing. It's called it's General Motors made it. It's a GM EMD, electric motor diesel locomotive control panel. And it looks like it's off the set of Lost. It's like this combination of instructions of levers and keys that basically can operate any locomotive that's GM EMD. So I found one in eBay that had been used on a Burlington Northern train car. They decommissioned it. They shipped a bunch of them to South Korea. They were used on railroads there. They were decommissioned, and then the owner, she put them up on eBay. I saw it. First, I was like, this looks amazing. I was like 10 minutes away from getting like a boat throttle,
right?
Or a wheel. And I sent it to the fabrication team in Twisp. They're like, this is interesting. I showed it to my train friend. He's like, this is the real deal. If you can figure it out. So we pulled the trigger, had it shipped from South Korea. Guys came here, picked it up, took it back to Twisp, took it all apart, figured out like how we could work it. And then they created the whole drive system for the actual train itself. And so, and then the biggest thing was, how do you get power to a train, to a moving office on rails? And there were a lot of schemes. There was like a big reel at the end that was outside the studio that would expand and contract depending on where the car was. And then ultimately we got it down to, there's a company called Hannay Reels, and they make custom commercial reels. So we had a custom commercial reel made for the size of our rail car that could sit like 2/3, about half under the rail car. So you wouldn't even see it. But a design problem came up where we needed one big enough for the reel. So part of it was going to bump up through the floor. So we had to solve for that. And so the solve was we created a bench, which is cool because when you walk in, there's benches and cabooses. So you don't even really see it. It's kind of magical. But as the train car moves away from the house, the reel pulls in the cord. And as you move away from the forest end, it pulls it out. So we have full power to the studio, and the locomotive control panel operates by insertion of this reverser handle key, which is this big brass or 3D printed key that you insert in. Once you insert it, it unlocks all the other functions of the panel. So you can flip it right to go to the house, flip it left to go to the woods. And then there's an 8-notch lever throttle control. And as you push it, it clicks into the next notch. So the studio is engineered so at just a basic turn of a switch, it'll drive at the lowest speed, or it has a responsive throttle control. And when I say responsive, the joke is like, it's like the Nerf gun of bullet trains. Like the low speed is like a mile an hour to 2 miles. The high speed is probably like 6 or 7.
Right.
And then the next level of insanity is, how do you stop the train? How do you make sure the train car doesn't run into the house? and what happens if someone accidentally gets on there and doesn't know what they're doing, and prevent it from crashing? So we had to take some inspiration from regular railroading, and they have this thing called positive train control, where the engineers running the train, if they don't tap a pedal within a certain time period, an alarm goes off. It gives them a second chance, I believe, to interact, to show that they're still operational, functional. And if that doesn't happen, the train stops. Well, those trains takes a mile to stop, right? We don't have a mile. We have 110 feet. So we had to create a positive train control stop at both ends, where once the train car reaches a certain area within both stops, a sensor drops from the bottom of the car, makes contact with a metal bar, which tells the control to stop. So you can physically hold on to the key or brake and stop. The throttle kind of is the brake, or you can take your hands off and it'll auto stop. But the speed in which you're traveling to the stop determines how close the car ends. And at the end of both stations, we have custom steel wheel stops, welded to the track. So if all else fails, it would stop there. And then the next layer on top of that is earthquake. So we have vertical steel stabilizer bars mounted on the inside of each wheel. So in the event of something, that extra pressure would prevent the car from tipping.
Okay.
It's a lot of, it's like over engineering something for all the use cases, but, with visitors and animals and so on and so forth, you have to think of all those things.
So I'd like to ask you to go back to the first day you worked in your new office.
Yeah. Well,
what was that like?
I was, I think anybody who's doing something like this is kind of like borderline a free thinker.
I don't think borderline is the word. I think you just take that
full
out.
on.
Yeah, full on.
I mean, I was in here, to be fair, before it was even done. I mean, I was in here the day that the studio was sitting on the rails, just framed, no walls.
Mm-hmm.
Like I had a chair out here.
Yeah, I'm talking about the accumulation of all of this planning, this work. And I even want to go so far as your stuff was in here.
Oh, yeah.
So that first day, and you rolled out, and one of the things I always ask in my show, and we're going to just get to this right now, is, are you a fan of coffee? And you're not. You're a Mountain Dew drinker. So you brought that first Mountain Dew out here. I mean, you were ready to go to work, and I don't know if it was a Monday or Thursday. I don't care what day of the week it was, but everything was done.
Yeah,
like you've got it. Your desk down there's got all sorts of things on it, and the library that we're sitting in right now. What was that first day?
Oh, it was like, I think it's kind of like that moment when I felt like it was like the moment when I was done doing the Gretzky thing. It's sort of like it kind of every single day leading up to that day, I was doing something towards it. And it was kind of like I had to mentally switch over to the function was getting it done to the function of actually like being in it and working. And I think the moment that it kind of like really sunk in, because I probably that first day I actually had some work to do, so it was like plugging things in and turning the music on, and was about lunchtime. And the first instinct, because it was at the end of where we are seeing today, we're at the end of the line, and we're where we are now. We're literally looking over the valley to this row of these tall trees that are all the same height. And that was where the train ran. So, the thing that kind of got me was when it was lunchtime, and my instinct was to just kind of walk out and step off the platform onto the rail stool and then walk back to the house. And I was like, I'm going to drive this thing home. And I remember opening up the door, there's a big steel yellow door in the same color as the Great Northern. And the door is like a big pivot. So it opens flush, and I put the key in and I put the throttle to like notch 3, and it was cold, but it was sunny. And I just remember kind of bringing it home, and it was, I don't even think that day I probably didn't get a lot of work done. I was just like, it was the end of the construction, but the beginning of enjoying it. Kind of like the house. When we moved in, we felt like we were on vacation. Mm-hmm. And I was like, man, like, I feel like I've been so, it's like a mix of like, you work hard to make your luck. It was a lot of work. It was a lot of traveling. It was a lot of unknowns to get to this point. But I remember thinking how how excited I was to think about like, what are we going to make in here? You know, like, what am I going to do in here? But then what with like the collaborators that I work with, or like clients I haven't even imagined work, you know, like what is going to happen in this thing? Because this isn't like a thing that came at the middle or the beginning or even like early first quarter of the career. This is like we're getting ready to go out, I think, for like, we're at halftime of the career, I hope. And we still have a whole other half to go.
Right.
And what's going to be made in this is going to be a direct result of all that, the last 3 years of working to, you know, the place itself is sort of a little bit of a monument to what has happened before.
Sure.
Right. And things will swap out and new things will come in and everything like that. But I think for me, it's like, and I remember telling this to the New York Times reporter, you know, it's like, I remember being I remember like growing up and watching Mr. Rogers, and like, you know, you start off and you're in this little miniature town, and then Mr. Rogers comes through, and the first thing that happens in that show every day is like the trolley leaves reality and it goes off to the land of make-believe. And for me, like, that's what this is. Like, this is kind of like put away from the house, imagine things that haven't been imagined, or create things, or begin to like start that journey for that idea or project, so that ultimately I can bring that back into and share with. And I know obviously, like, you don't need a moving train in the woods to do that. That's been done for like the beginning of time. But what if you did? And I think that's what's next. You know, I think a kind of an interesting thing that has happened because of this project is now there's new project opportunities, actually combining my work in branding and storytelling with railroads. So like right now I'm working on 2 railroad specific projects that literally came out because I started an Instagram to do research and connect with railroad people to make this a really meaningful, like a cool space for me to work, but a real meaningful and connected place to railroads. You know, like it's really an homage to railroads in Washington and incarnation and just the spirit of the railroad. And I think I'm most excited about like those projects, and then bringing, you know, like having people like you come and see it, because, you know, there's a lot of craziness happening. I think it's really important for people to see something magical, to remind them that no matter all the tech or all the shiny objects or things that sort of come in and out of our view, that like real things that you can touch that come from imagination are as important, right? And this train and coming out here is not about getting to the end of the line the quickest. It's actually the opposite. I think downstairs when you first come in, there's a old railway sign that sits on the bench and it says slow. Right. And I think this is like the slow food of that. This is sort of like taking a step back. Upstairs, you know, we're seeing things at a higher altitude with less right in our face. And I think that's creatively about like, just sometimes I come up here and just listen to music. I may not even write anything, or sometimes I come up here and I'll just write or jot down notes. Sometimes I'll bring my laptop up here but the contrast between upstairs and downstairs is the contrast between like making and dreaming. And I think, that's what I'm most looking forward to. And the view's kind of always changing depending on where you are. And most architecture is about this object sort of fixed in a landscape. And I think that's what makes this really interesting, is that the landscape is fixed now, but the building is moving.
Right.
And I'm intrigued to see what inspires the work in this. Just as I was intrigued to see what it was like to live in a house connected to nature. It introduces like this new vector that hasn't been in my life, and so yeah, it's pretty amazing.
So we're going to link to some things that this will be coming out after. So the listeners can visualize because this is the audio format and this needs to be visually, you've done a great job, but it needs to be visually experienced also. So I'm going to ask you one last question.
Yep.
You ready? This is, I want you, and I ask this question of almost every guest. It's very important. Cake or pie, and why?
Yeah. I've always been a pie guy.
Okay.
I think growing up, growing up, like formally lemon meringue pie, always a winner. High school Hostess fruit pie.
So I'm going to interrupt you. My high school lunch was a Hostess fruit pie, a Charleston Chew candy bar, and a can of Coke.
Oh yeah. No, I mean
that was my every day.
I was kind of like and I don't know I don't think anybody that I played lacrosse with would. I mean, they'd probably remember, but I would like take a Hostess cherry pie before every lacrosse game. Okay. Just to, and you'd open it and you weren't sure, like, was this made like 100 years ago? Like when you turned.
Did it really matter?
No. And, but then the thing that blew me away was when they did the Hostess pudding pies for a short time. And then they went out, and the ones that were at like Safeway, the non-Hostess brand they were trash. Then I got into, I could do like a good rhubarb pie. I've had, to be fair, I've had the what's the Twin Peaks cherry pie. I mean, I don't know. Actually, the Remlinger Farms cherry pies here are very good. Okay. In town. I will take a rhubarb pie. I could do that, but probably like my favorite would be like peanut butter ice cream pie with that's. I will say though, like at our house, we will our kids will do cake most of the time, and my wife will make an amazing carrot cake and a coconut cake. And so I'm not
you're not anti-cake, but you're pro pie.
Yeah, I'm pro. And the funny thing is, whenever I explain something to people about like the mix of things, I always set it in the frame of a pie, like a pie chart. I would never say like, oh, well, like this many pieces of cake, or like if you were to interview like 5 or 6 designers and say like, tell me some things that Lou would say, he'd say, well, this project, like 40% of the pie is X. So I think it's just part of
who you are.
Yeah, it's part of, but I do have a soft spot for those scenes from Seinfeld, for the Entmans, like end of the aisle, the cakes, and like a good cake is a good, okay. It's a good cake. So,
but pie is the answer. Well, Lou, thank you. This was unique for me. And I don't know that we've done it justice without imagery. So we're going to have to make sure that the show notes have imagery for the audience. And we'll link to places where they can find out more about you.
Yep. And
I will leave with this. I'm really curious what you're going to do next.
Yeah,
and we'll come back for that one.
Yeah. We have some plans.
I can't imagine that you don't.
I will end with last week I got a call from the lead guy that we worked with on this, and one of the concerns we had when we finished this was, what if someone builds something, on the next spot? So after 6 years of like back and forth, we were able to secure the land that sort of sits behind the railroad track. And last week, the guy called me and we were talking, and he's like, well, I've been thinking about it, and like, it wouldn't be that hard to continue the railway.
I was going to say it, but I was afraid to. I was going to ask. Oh,
so you never know. But and he's like, we could also we could run it pretty far, and then we could also put a turntable in there, and then you could turn it and head. So I don't know. Let's
stay tuned.
Let's let it go. But,
my gosh.
Hope you enjoyed the show. You can reach me on Twitter at ExploreWaState. I'd love to hear your comments. You can also visit our website at explorewashingtonstate.com. If you know anyone who would like the show, it'd be amazing if you'd share the show with them. This is the biggest way that we grow this show. Good old word of mouth. Glad you were here with me today, and I hope to have you listening to the next episode. See you then.